All right. Welcome, everyone, to the People Strategy Forum podcast. We're a show that guides leaders on how to elevate the workforce overall, and we believe that people are at the heart of successful organization. So this means that team members' well-being, their rewards, their career development, it's all essential to a happy and healthy and highly productive workforce. So this show discusses the practical and effective leadership strategies for top executives and senior professionals and talent managers. And overall, I just want to mention, a lot of people are joining us on the show live today. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box there, and we'll take those throughout the show. And if you happen to be on one of the social media platforms, please feel free to add your questions in there, and we'll get to those after the show as well. So I'm pleased to have you all on here today. So I do want to recognize our different hosts that we have. And so we have, in addition to myself, we have Shar Miller and Sumit Singla. Shar Miller is a small business entrepreneur, and also she has deep expertise in as a chief people officer in some major medical systems. So we're glad to have her advice here. And then also we have Sumit Singla, and he's broadcasting out of India, a deep level of expertise working for many companies such as Accenture and Aon and so forth. And so we're happy to have him on the show. So thank you, Sumit. And it looks like we're just having Howard Niswitz joining us as well. So Howard is a seasoned HR and compensation expert. He specializes in a lot of systems. And I've worked with Howard for a number of years, so I'm very pleased to have him here. All right. Well, today we are joined by Claire Chandler, president and founder of Talent Boost, who's turning the tide of how companies approach growth overall. And one thing is unique about Claire is that she's a prolific writer, and so we're going to show you some of the books that she's put together. But she has just about 30 years of experience in her field, and Claire is she's not just an expert, she's a visionary who understands the heart of every successful expansion is people behind the scenes. So her growth on purpose framework has become the North Star for businesses to determine to scale without losing their soul and or their best talent for that being. And so Claire is going to tell us about her book and how she's transformed that philosophy into a book that's going to be coming out here soon. So Claire is no longer a stranger to the limelight. I mean, she has you've done what 150 podcast appearances, so that's quite the dedication of getting out there. And I know that you're a common voice on Forbes and so forth. And such a great achievement you did is that you've been crowned as the 2023's best entrepreneur in business consulting. And so congrats on that, Claire.
Thank you.
So I know that, and I just wanted to share with our viewing audience here the different books that you have: the Culture Effect, the Whirlpool Effect, and turning leaders into performance accelerators. And I mean, there's a lot of different things here that you've been sharing with leaders over time. So I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. But first, let's talk about how you got started and what you're doing today. How you what gave you the passion to be helping leaders grow and businesses grow?
Yeah, love that, and just thank you for the opportunity to join you fine folks and have a conversation that I am definitely energized by and passionate about. So I am a self-proclaimed corporate survivor. I spent the first 20 or so of those 30 years that you described. Boy, am I tired when I think that it's been 30 years, but the first 20 or so I spent within the walls of corporate America. And now I have owned my own business. I founded it 10 years ago this year. And so now I'm in a position where I advise leaders from the outside looking in. So those first couple of decades working within corporate, which, by the way, I swore I would never do. I was never going to go into corporate. That was just not for me. I'm the product of a school teacher and a small business owner. But alas, when I finished college, that's where the opportunities were. And I honestly wouldn't trade the experience. Spending a couple of decades in a couple of large organizations really helps me hone some best practices. You know, one of the benefits of being in a large organization is you get a lot of structure. Not all of that structure is positive and reinforces culture, which we'll get into, but there is structure, and you do learn how to separate out the best practices that you want to replicate and the traits, the experiences, the leadership behaviors that you never want to emulate. And so those 20 or so years for me were invaluable. And fast forward to the year was 2011, and I was the vice president of human resources for a large global organization. And I was being groomed to succeed the executive vice president of HR. And this was a big deal on a number of fronts. First and foremost, because I didn't start out in HR. That was another thing I swore I was never going to do, was go and work in human resources, right? And I really had to learn the hard way to stop using the word never, because I, lo and behold, found my way in through the side door. They had an opening for a training development lead, took my shot, really kindled my passion for teaching and training others, which I should have seen coming, being the daughter of a school teacher. But nevertheless, I sort of expanded in that role and spent several years within a corporate HR function. And then as I was being groomed to take over for the head of HR, I was put into more of a line role where I was overseeing a really talented team in a very large division of the company, but it was full cycle human resources. And I learned a couple of things from that. One, that you are only as strong as your team. And so when you have an amazing team, you can have an amazing experience. And when you have any weakness on your team, you'd better address that as proactively as possible and compassionately as possible. And I had the good fortune of having a wonderful team. But the other thing I learned was that I was not super passionate about the full cycle of human resources. What I was really passionate about was the talent space, was helping our organization build a stronger culture, helping the right talent find the right roles and the right development paths to amplify their impact, and all of those things. And it still wasn't enough for me to say I need to make a change, until one day I was diagnosed with cancer. This was still in 2011. And that gift, and it's the only way I could describe it, was that it reminded me that life is too short, right? Now, fast forward to today, I'm cancer free. That is not where this story is heading. But the great thing about that experience was that it really reminded me that if you're going to make an impact in the world in the limited time that you're given, you'd better do it in ways where you can be passionate, you can feel fulfilled, you can play all out, and you can fully commit to what you're doing. And so that was the excuse I needed to take these musings around, I wonder how I can get back into the talent space and go off into the entrepreneurial unknown. And it took about 2 years to sort of find my way and hone my craft and really get down to what I wanted to focus in on as a business owner, which is why I didn't found my company Talent Boost until 2013. But that's really how I got here.
Yeah, you mentioned that important awakening and of going through something a bit of a shock to your life and to make you reframe it. And I think that if we've spoken to many professionals that have experienced that over the past few years, and just like many of the workforce have gone through that, surviving the pandemic and then rethinking about what's important to them in life and so forth, and really going to work with much more purpose than they had before. Work is more than just a paycheck, right? So it's great to hear that happened to you early on, and it framed your success and how you help others.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk to most entrepreneurs, which is what I now consider myself, and I would say almost without exception, they have some sort of transformational moment or event or experience, like I did with cancer, that really kind of knocked them off of their complacency and made them stop waiting to go pursue their dream. It certainly happened for me. It has happened for more entrepreneurs that I've interacted with than not. And I think the pandemic was sort of the global awakening for people to say, I can't keep waiting to go take my shot. So, to your point, I think that was the opportunity that a lot of other people needed or were perhaps waiting for, to give themselves permission to do more with their lives and their careers.
Another thing you mentioned is that really resonated with me as well, because I too came from a corporate background for the first, about almost 15 years of my career working with, ADP and McKesson and BlackRock and Barclays. And I too noticed that the beautiful structure that is provided in some of those organizations, right? And that's why I was really excited with starting in my consulting practice. I was like, oh, I got to take all these great ideas and help small to medium-sized businesses grow and scale. And I had the best intentions when I started out. And then when I was putting these ideas to practice in a lot of these smaller organizations, I found that they didn't have the basic infrastructure pieces that were necessary to ensure that structure, that overall structure I was bringing, took hold. So have you had a similar experience with leadership and coaching your leaders as far as these advanced structures compared to what they may be starting out with?
Wow, that hits me so hard because it is so true, and that's definitely been my experience. I think there is a very fine line, first of all, in larger organizations between structure and bureaucracy. And it's sort of the same conversation you have around the longer an organization exists and the larger it gets, the more silos get formed. And no one intentionally forms silos, but they form nonetheless, right? And I have certainly found that to be my experience. When I first became an entrepreneur and started to form my business, my first clients were not the large corporate organizations. They were the small ones. They were the startups. They were the ones that had a big growth appetite. And to your point, zero infrastructure to make that happen. And it's an exciting time to partner with a founder or a small startup or a small family-run business and help them elevate to that next level. And it's also critical, right? I always say that the most critical hire you ever make is your first one. And then it's that first pivot point in your growth journey that is really, really critical because you're laying the foundation. And so I think what you found is certainly what I found, which is we had all this corporate experience. We had all these best practices and frameworks. And we thought we were building the floor for these organizations to grow up from. And really what we were coming in with were the load-bearing walls, right? And we were finding the hard way, I think, in early years, and I don't want to speak for you, but you're nodding emphatically, so I'm sure you were kind of living this as well. We had to take a step back from these frameworks we knew could help them and make sure that they built a solid foundation first. So yeah, a lot of being an entrepreneur is we get so enamored with what we know is going to be the solution that saves them. And we have to wait for them to catch up to the moment where they can actually receive it and implement it and own it.
That's perfect. So tell me a little bit about how this all comes into the growth on purpose framework. So what are the core tenets of this framework, and how does it help companies really expand and without losing their best talent?
So growth on purpose is the methodology that I have been honing over the last 10 years as a business owner and over the last 30 really of my own corporate experience that then morphed into entrepreneurial experience. And it's a methodology that one is while it has a lot of structure and it has a lot of sequencing in terms of a methodology, it can be overwhelming at first, to your point, for those earlier, less mature organizations or large organizations that have become so siloed they can't get out of their own way. And so one of the benefits of this particular methodology is it meets you where you are, right? So there are four main pillars or tenets of the methodology. But depending on where you are in your own growth trajectory and your own maturity as an organization, you don't necessarily have to start at zero. you can start, kind of midstream if those first pillars have already taken root and are starting to, kind of mature and bear fruit for you. But the entire methodology is really built around attracting the right talent, finding ways to retain that talent by putting them into roles that best suit their fast lanes or their natural talents, accelerating their ability to really get deeply engaged and contribute in meaningful ways. And then, of course, build up that alignment between what matters to them and how they can collectively move the needle toward achieving their growth strategy.
Yeah, I often find that when you're thinking about the first steps that organizations need to take, it's important to break it down into those simple steps. I'm glad to hear that you have those four main pillars that entrepreneurs can get their arms around.
Well, and it certainly helped me organize the chaos of my own entrepreneurial journey, right? Because I think jumping out of a large, bureaucratic, structured, rigid corporate experience into the entrepreneurial unknown, you can go one of two ways. You can do what you had, described earlier, which is take up all your best practices, stuff them in your briefcase, and go out and sell them to the market, and stay true to those best practices and find that they don't fit for everybody. Or you might err on the other side and say, I'm going to invent the new great thing, and I'm going to become so enamored with it that I can't believe that nobody is lining up at my door to buy it. Right? So there's sort of these two roads that diverge in the woods, so to speak. And they can easily send you down a path of frustration. So for me, part of compiling the methodology and evolving it over time and testing it with clients, and really kind of bulletproofing it, was to understand that it had to strike the right balance between being reliable enough so we can replicate it and being flexible enough that it can truly meet the leaders and the culture and the organization where they are.
And so, as you first engage with leaders, what is the first thing that you discuss? Are there some certain non-negotiables that you're thinking about, the values and where they have to have their mindset that's important to have with your framework?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. I think it just in terms of mindset, and I love that you started there, because I've gotten to a point in my business where I don't need to work with everybody, but who I get to work with is such a humbling and kind of awe-inspiring experience. Like in the early days when you start your business, you go where clients are going to pay you to do something that will generate value, right? And then you grow the relationship from there. I really do get the honor to work with some amazing people, and their companies are amazing because the leaders get it. The leaders are humble enough to know that they got to where they are through hard work and luck. And the only way they continue to grow themselves, their team, their organization is through a good balance of self-awareness and vulnerability. And of course, transparency that will build trust over time. So for me, that is one of the non-negotiables. I have to work with leaders at the highest level of an organization who can get deeply involved in the work, not where it constrains their bandwidth, but just in terms of having the mental endorsement of what we're about to do, knowing it may change some things, it may shake a couple of people up, but the end result is going to pay off. That's definitely a non-negotiable. But the other thing I find, as I said, one of the benefits of the methodology is it's flexible enough to meet people where they are. They typically will engage me because they are feeling one of like four main pains. The first one is low attraction, right? They can't seem to bring in enough of the right talent into their organization to make their mission possible. So they're just finding it hard to attract talent. That is extending their time to fill, their quality of hire, the cost of external hires, all of those sorts of things. So that's like one of the pains. The second one is low retention. So, everyone is sort of like, oh, when I ask anyone what is their biggest pain point, they typically will tell me it's high turnover. So this is low retention. Well, part of that is you may not be attracting the right talent to begin with. And then once you've got them in your organization, you're just sort of standing around waiting for them to be brilliant. and not really doing enough to give them a compelling reason to stay, right? So there's sort of that low retention. Then, of course, there's low engagement. And it's interesting because most of the organizations, the bigger ones, do annual, maybe quarterly engagement surveys. And so I'll always ask them, that's one of my discovery questions is, do you do surveys? What's your engagement rate right now? And they'll tell me, oh, we're, 63% or we're 72% or whatever. And then I go, that's great. What's your real engagement rate? And they kind of stop and I say, your real engagement rate is what your survey score comes out to multiplied by the participation rate. Right. And then of course they get a little bit depressed, which is great because then they lean into the conversation and we can work with that. Right. So that's a key pain point as well. They don't have enough of the right people in the right roles, really leaning in and fully committing with their best efforts, their best talents, their best ideas. And then the fourth pain is what I call low IHR. So internal hire rate or internal fill rate, IFR. And they don't express it that way, but it's a metric that can sort of quantify how leaky their talent pipeline is. If they are constantly going to the outside market to fill critical positions at all levels of leadership, it's because something farther upstream is broken. Probably one of those other pain points. So those are some of the things that either I will ask them on, during an intake call, or they will come to me with and say, turnover is crazy, engagement is, bad. We just lost one of our top talent. We can't get people to believe us when we say our employer brand and our culture, are in alignment. It's all of those things, but they kind of translate into those four problems, which on a good note, you can actually measure.
Yeah, so you're definitely speaking my language, and so that's what we focus on a lot and at Comp Team and the People Strategy Forum, helping leaders to understand those issues and how to solve them. So it's so great to have you on the show. You're such a perfect fit in that element. So thank you so much.
Sure.
So let's go ahead and dive into each one of those elements and how your framework helps solve these important issues. So let's talk about the first piece there in attracting talent.
Yeah.
And Sumit and I often have this conversation a lot because it's about, you have to create a culture in a workplace that is what people want, and everybody wants something a little bit different. And so how do you ensure that companies are attracting the right talent for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings up the first pillar of this 4-pillar methodology, which is aspiration. You mentioned it before, you called it purpose, which it's almost like I fed you that line. It was so perfectly in alignment, because that is what an aspiration is, right? It's your purpose. It's your why. If you're a student of Simon Sinek, he does a lot of thought leadership in that concept of starting with why. But it is so important, before we start bringing in the load-bearing walls, which the other 3 pillars sort of help to prop up, we have to make sure that a company's aspiration, their why, their reason for existing in the first place is dialed in. And what's really interesting is, and it's a very clear tell of the leaders who get it and the leaders who don't, when you ask them what their mission, their vision, and their values are. Because if they kind of look at you sideways and go, well, didn't you do any research before you called me? Like on the website, we've got that mission statement. And I'll go, oh yeah, tell me what it says. And then you hear them busily calling up their website to look at what the mission statement is. Or maybe it's on a framed poster on the wall. And it's like, right, you're missing the point, right? Like the mission statement is not your aspiration. Your mission statement is for your shareholders, and because you have to have something in that spot on your website. But what are you really in business to achieve? Why are you doing this? Again, life is too short, right? To build a business you can't stand in with complete and deep conviction. And it's the reason, in my opinion, a lot of organizations struggle with attracting the right talent and then keeping the right talent, because either they have this really cool sounding mission and vision and set of values, and they don't actually follow those when you join the company, or they have a mission and a vision and values that are either so out of date or so out of alignment that even the top leadership doesn't believe it. And if they don't believe it, they can't sell it. And so the aspiration pillar is all about really getting dialed in, sometimes for the first time, if it's a startup or a maturing organization. And sometimes it's just a full refresh to say, you probably haven't looked at your mission statement for a while. Let's take a fresh look at what you're really here in business to accomplish now and what you want to become aspirationally. And so achieving that aspirational clarity is always a foundational activity. And if an organization cannot, with full conviction, stand there and say, we have a very solid mission, vision, and values, and they are completely congruous with what our culture is really like, then we start there.
So, I think that's so important what you just mentioned, as far as when we often hear, and as leaders, mission and vision, we think of those as of two, blocks that we all have to have some answer for when we're asked that question in organizations. But when you break it down to, okay, well, what is your aspiration? What's really behind that?
Yeah.
What is it's just breaking it down into normal language, right? I mean, it's making it real, and so forth. And I know Shar, I'd like to bring her out because her personal brand, is HR with a heart. And then and Shar, so when you explain your mission, and tell us your mission is relates to dignity and respect and so forth.
Compassion, dignity, and respect, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, to kind of, go on about that, Claire, I wish I had your books and did your consulting when I was a head of talent management and organizational effectiveness for one of my positions. And it was very challenging to be sitting at the executive table because I was kind of an experimental position in talent management strategy. And to break in, to have the right words. And quite candidly, I'll tell you that I didn't find that they were very compassionate or treated even me with compassion, dignity, and respect, because I was basically the person that had to basically call, sorry, the dogs are in here all of a sudden, but I had to call out various behaviors and silos and issues in the organization. And then all of a sudden I was kind of like, it's like, you can't handle the truth. You can't handle the truth. I felt like I should just be screaming it. You should,
Yeah.
because, engagement scores, people's scores, turnover, all of these things, and the silos and the bureaucracy that were impeding our talent management strategy, everything from recruiting to, career mobility and all those aspects. So you're completely right, because I decided when I opened up my own companies, my dogs are breathing back here. When I started opening up my own companies, that I had to have my own philosophy about compassion, dignity, and respect, and HR with a heart, and the whole thing, to be able to run my company effectively, and I had the ability to implement it. And I was so excited to start partnering with Sam and Comp Team, because when we started getting in the TMA method, which we'll talk about later, but I was able to apply positive psychology to the way I coach, mentored, developed every aspect of hiring, every element. And so it really aligned back to the purpose. It aligned to my mission, vision, values, and my purpose with the company. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
It's so telling to me that the organization you just referenced treated a role around talent management and strategy as experimental. Right. And there are so many
Right.
organizations that they have changed the window dressing around what they call human resources, but they really view them still as the personnel department. Just keep stuffing bodies into our vacancies, keep backfilling positions. And then they wonder
Right.
why they are constantly interviewing candidates, which, by the way, they hate to do, right? And so you experienced what I think so many organizations experience. The leaders have the biggest impact on the culture of a company. Their behavior, the way that they show up, whether they deeply believe in the path that their company is on, or they are just there because they finally got to the pinnacle in their career and now they're drunk with power, right? If the leadership doesn't believe it, and if the leadership doesn't walk the walk, how do you expect your people to do the same?
Well, I have to say one quick story is there was 14 executives, all probably making near, 800,000 each. And they're all sitting around their table and, kind of making each other feel good. And then I was supposed to stand up and like push the envelope about talent management strategy. And they weren't used to my role. So you're right. They weren't used to what I do and how, you know, and
Yeah.
at one point I was standing up on the whiteboard trying to talk through, and I was told by one of the executives, "You're confusing us. You're confusing us. We don't get what you're talking about." And I was like, I mean, it was basic recruiting, alignment, talent strategy, all that stuff that you just said.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I am not in the right organization if I'm confusing the executive team. This should not be that hard.
Right.
But yeah, they expected more of a traditional HR person
Of
talking.
course. Well, and what
Yeah.
annoyed them, I'm sure, about that whole conversation was, why are you coming in and taking up time on our agenda to talk to me
Right.
about something you should be handling? That's HR's job to deal with
Correct.
talent, right? Just
Correct.
like if we have a corporate communications department, I love this, then it's their sole job. They are the ones solely responsible for communicating consistent messages inside and outside of the company. And that's not true. They might be the champions of it. They might be the organizers of it. They might be the ones who stand up the frameworks to make sure you can replicate what works and engineer out what doesn't. But everyone is a nurturer of talent. Everyone is a talent manager. And the leaders in the companies that don't get that are the
Correct.
ones that are not on a growth march. They're on a death march.
For
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. I kept trying to convey, yes, this is a structure, and each of us are talent management experts. Each
That's
of us
right.
need to do. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
thank
no,
you.
this is a piece I know that Howard and I are we can attest to in just recent memory of some of the organizations that we're helping. So, getting the executive leadership, getting involved in some of those critical projects is essential. I mean, so for instance, a lot of times you would see a leader come in, so, oh, we got to do something with DEI. It's like, oh, somebody go do that, and just come back and with the package and a
Yeah.
bow when it's done, or a compensation program or talent management or a career pathing, whatever it may be. And so the important thing is that leaders need to be involved. They need to be involved to the extent that they're driving the discussion around the topic, so that it aligns with the overall corporate, the company why, as you were mentioning before. So I think that's a critical mindset to leadership, is to ensure that they're interested enough to really ensure that they're getting a good result and they're giving their input as necessary.
100%. And that's why I start with that pillar and I check in with organizations that may claim that their aspiration is completely dialed in, right? You want to always verify that, because this is one of those do not pass go moments. If your aspiration is not clear, everything else stems from that. Again, that's your floor. Those other three pillars are load bearing walls. But if your floor is shaky, it doesn't matter how good those other three pillars are. You're building your house on sand.
Right. So let's go to the next piece. You were talking about the next element that you're trying to solve is retaining your top performers in the organization.
Yes.
And so Sumit, just in your experience as far as when you're looking across the globe, what are the main factors that really keep your top performers in the seats that you've experienced?
I'm sorry. Were
I
you
think
asking me that question?
communication is sorry.
Nope.
So I think communication is the most important factor. And what happens is, as companies grow, and I belong to a region which is hyper growth or faster growth than a lot of others. When you're a small team that fits around a table and you get to talk to each other multiple times a day, suddenly as you expand, you find lesser and lesser time with the top leadership, and you feel like valued enough. And that's when things start going wrong, and people start having second thoughts about a long-term career. And I think that's where a lot of the engagement goes away, Whereas if you ask a leader, they'd say nothing has changed. It's only our people who've changed. We're still the same. We've still got the same business model. In fact, we're growing. So I've got no idea why people want to move out and why they're not willing to grow with us. But I think communication is where it kind of begins and ends at the same time.
What is your perspective, Claire?
I could not agree with you more. I think communication is as foundational as, it's foundational to culture, as is trust in your leadership, which we'll get to a little bit later. But I 100% agree. Communication has to be consistent. It has to be transparent. It has to be, there has to be some cohesion across messaging from the leaders. You can't have one leader conveying a certain message and the other leader saying, yeah, but that's not what I believe, and go this way. That's how silos just continue to form. So all of that, Sam, you were sharing some of my my earlier books. My first book that I released was called The Whirlpool Effect, and there was this portion of that where I talked about a leader's sort of reflexive action to say, well, if we're not getting the results we want, we just have to hire better people. And I always counter that to say, it's not necessarily that you have to hire better people. You have to hire people better, right? It's not enough just to attract the right talent. You have to bring them in and nurture that talent as you go. And Shar, to your earlier point, that is not solely the responsibility of HR. HR can drive a conversation. HR can help the business become more accountable and see early returns on taking that accountability so that they will do it more. It's sort of like if you start an exercise routine, if you can drop a couple of pounds like in the first week, you might actually keep going. If you don't, and it takes, a year to see any progress, you're more likely to, to give that up. So I think it's really important. And I think just coming back to what we were just talking about, that this notion of not just bringing in the right people, but doing it in the right way, starts to chip away at that high turnover and that low retention, right? And that's where we bring in that first load-bearing wall, which is that second pillar, and it's called awareness. I think it is extremely vital for any organization. First of all, as an organization, to be super aware of what they have and what they lack, as far as it relates to the mission and the aspirational journey that they're on. Right? What are the things that we're doing? What are the traits that we have? What is the talent that we employ that helps reinforce getting closer to that aspiration, and what does not serve us? But then it is also incumbent upon leaders who shape culture, because leaders have the biggest impact on culture, to be deeply self-aware of what they're bringing to the table. And it is equally important to raise the self-awareness of every single person in your organization, but it has to start with the leaders. There are too many leaders in my corporate experience who are famous for saying things like, do as I say, not as I do. I got to where I am without any sort of development. I don't need any now. I don't need a coach. We don't need to invest in their development. It worked for me this way. It should work for others. Shar, you are nodding like this was the room of 14 was probably chock full of that sort of mentality, right? So it's really important that they gain awareness, self-awareness of what they're bringing to the table individually. And this is everything from what they are uniquely good at. So what are their fast lanes? What are their natural talents? And how do they turn them into a strength? What motivates them as leaders, as individual contributors, as everybody in between? And also, what are their communication must-haves and turn-offs? Back to the point that communication is so important. It's also important that it's not a one-size-fits-all. If it were, we could equip every leader, no matter how dysfunctional, with a script. And as long as they read that script, they're going to get engagement. It doesn't work like that. It has to be authentic. It has to be natural to their own style, and it has to be in alignment with what they do well. So that second pillar is really important as well, to start to hold up the rest of the business, because everyone has to be aware of their strengths, their blind spots, their communication preferences. And then the real trick is to put all of those people, leaders on down the chain, into roles that best play to their strengths and feed their motivations, because then the other stuff starts to come. They are going to feel more deeply committed. They are going to feel more likely to stay longer. Do people stay in the same company for their entire career anymore? No, but we can get them to stay a little bit longer than perhaps they wanted to. And while they're here, while they're with us, we can tap into their strengths and their ideas and their energy and their motivation in more impactful ways.
Hey, I just want to mention one thing about your point there, because I found that our executive team would often put our senior leaders that were having performance issues into coaching because they felt that the consultant coach could fix the performance issues. And I kept conveying, no, this is supposed to be positive. This is supposed to be, inspirational, aspirational,
Yeah.
everything what you just said. It's
Yeah.
not like you're going to fix a problem person by giving them a coach. And then also they would ask me if we could have the coach sit in on the corrective action dialogue. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't even understand how we just totally understand the whole purpose of that process.
Oh my gosh, I can't
Have
agree
you
with
seen
you.
that?
Yes, unfortunately, yes. I think too many organizations misuse and misapply and misunderstand the value of a coach. A coach is not intended to be part of your performance improvement plan or some last train stop on the progressive discipline train, right?
Correct.
A coach is supposed to help elevate what is already working well and really help you to unleash your full potential. It is not meant as an intervention that is a pass or fail. And I say that to organizations all the time. If you want to bring me in to be a coach, I want to work with the folks that you really want to put some investment in, because coaching is an investment. I am not
Correct.
going to
It's
be
very
there and become
expensive.
well, yes. And I don't, I'm not going to come in there and be a stopgap for all the things that you should have been doing all along. Now, do I ever think somebody is a lost cause? No. However, there is a portion of the population, and unfortunately, one of them are in the executive leadership wing, who are uncoachable.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the limitations of coaching, there's sort of this very sacred cone of silence around the coaching relationship, right? How else can you get somebody to truly be vulnerable, to truly become self-aware, and to truly own what is unique to them in ways that will serve them better throughout their career? If you violate that and you go report back to their direct manager and say, well, he or she is failing in this, it breaks down, and then you have no chance of coaching helping that person to move the needle. But because of that, because you're protecting this cone of silence, the progress that the coachee is making or not making is self-reported. So you may have a coaching participant who doesn't have self-awareness. And no amount of coaching, if they're not ready to really drop the walls and do the work, is going to help that. So the self-reporting aspect to me, is going to continue to be a challenge in the coaching relationship if it is not brought in the right way, if it is not framed up in the right way, and if it is not endorsed by executive leadership as an investment in talent.
Well said. Bravo.
You're getting me on my soapbox, Char.
I know. I'm glad I'm not alone, because I was like, this is common sense, but it's apparently not. But anyway, that's exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Claire, one of our listeners, Anna, has a question kind of related to that. So, a lot of times in smaller startups, we have a lot of executives that come in and they're all like have these leadership driven mindsets, their own ideas on how they want to run things. And I had an experience with a couple of my clients in this as well. Whereas they may manage different locations or definitely different departments, but they want to do their own thing. They want to lead their own organization the way they want to do so. And, when you're trying to build a consistent culture, you want everybody to be marching in the same direction. And so what are the types of tools, communication tools? I mean, is it surveys? What is it that helps you ensure that you're getting all these executives going in the same direction?
So surveys can be extremely valuable when they are owned across the organization, not seen as an HR exercise, and when they are followed up upon and actually used to drive action and decisions, right? Too often, organizations, small and large, startups and mature, pay for engagement surveys, but don't actually invest in them. And what I mean by that is they generously will hire a survey consultant or get, an online kind of survey technology and pat themselves on the back that they're measuring engagement. This is why when I said before, when you're measuring engagement, you really want to get the true number, which is the score times the participation rate. But, speaking specifically to your point, Sam, and then Anna, to your question, surveys can be valuable, but they have to be set up the right way. I see too often when an organization does an annual survey, it's great that they do it, but they can't just go through the motions. And then when a new executive leader is brought in, they kind of inherit this, they sort of jump in on the deep end of the pool and they say, but it's already swirling. So we just do this annual survey, you'll get your results and, do with them what you will. There's sort of this cavalier and almost complacent attitude about it, and they're missing the point. And to me, then they're just burning money. So rather than just paying for surveys, they need to invest in them. They need to ask the right questions. It doesn't have to be the kitchen sink. It doesn't have to be, 100 questions. It could be the Gallup 13. But it also has to be positioned in the right way. When it is teed up as it's that time of year again, when HR is going to send you a link to a survey, we would really appreciate your input and everything's confidential and we're listening and we want your feedback. It is going to be dismissed as another check the box exercise, like the year-end performance review, because it's not positioned in the right way. So specifically, Anna, to your question, I think surveys can be beneficial in getting people aligned and starting to break down silos upon the first signals of that. So for example, I get migraines and I know if my peripheral vision starts to go, the earlier I can notice that and pop an Excedrin, the more likely I'm going to keep the effects of the migraine at bay, right? It's the same here. The earlier you can start to see the signs and the signals that silos are forming or leadership is breaking down, you want to be able to address that. So I think surveys are a great tool, but you have to present them the right way. It can't be teed up as an HR exercise that, if you can find time, please help them out. And they also have to be positioned as a leadership resource. So the leaders have to endorse it. Coming back to communication, the leaders have to own that this is something that provides immense value in terms of your honest and candid input. What are we doing well? Where are we missing the mark? How can we become a stronger company? And how can you take part in that? And if you go after that with your survey and you thank people for the results and you tie in your follow-up actions to what they contributed, then your engagement is going to start to go up. So, the way you do that is you involve the leadership up front. You have them own the fact that you're doing engagement surveys in the first place. You give them the business case for why that should matter. And if they can't get there, then don't do the survey.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Claire. As we're moving to our end of our time that we have here today, when we think about all that we've discussed, what are the core things that you want our listeners to walk away with based on our discussion?
So I appreciate how deeply we've gotten into some of this stuff, and the soapbox you have given me permission to kind of jump upon and talk about all this great stuff. I did reference that there are 4 pillars to this methodology. The other 2, just to round them out, are acceleration of trust and alignment on what matters. I am working on my next book, which is taking longer because it's going to be a deeper dive into this specific methodology. And remind me at the end, Sam, I'll let everybody know where they can sign up on the waiting list for that book, but it goes into much more detail on all of this stuff. I think the bottom line is, again, the culture is foundational to business success. And there is a direct correlation between the strength and fitness of your culture and the potential of your business to actually grow versus die. Because those are the only 2 choices. You can't stay stagnant. You're either growing or you're dying. And culture is so foundational and is so important that you build it the right way as early as possible, and that you take active, intentional steps to address the problems and the symptoms as you see those. And leaders are the ones who shape culture. It doesn't bubble up organically. It doesn't form from the ground up. It doesn't just happen. Leaders shape culture, and they either do that intentionally or they let it form around them. and your people are watching, your people are paying attention. So leaders need to understand that they are the nurturers of talent, whether you're inside of HR or outside of HR. And the more that you show up and you lean in and you own and take accountability for helping to attract the right talent by standing in your own conviction, by retaining that talent, by helping other people become self-aware and you demonstrating self-awareness, by reinforcing and building and defending trust between yourself, your leaders, and across teams, and then helping people to make a more powerful connection and a more tangible one between what they do individually in their role and why it matters to the bigger aspiration and the bigger journey that we're on. All of those things plant the seeds, and all of those things strengthen the walls, not the silos, right? And so when leaders lead the way in authentic ways, and they stand in their conviction, and they do things that are in alignment with their mission, vision, and values, their employees will follow suit. If they don't, then that's what employees will understand and believe is what matters to them.
Wise words. Thank you so much, Claire. So for our listeners out there that want to know more, they want to know where to get your books and how to engage with you, what would you tell them?
So the easiest place to come find me is my website, clairechandler.net. The book, as I said, is not out yet. I am still working on it, but it will be out in Q1 of 2024. If you want to get on the waiting list, so you are one of the first to know when it hits Amazon, go to clairechandler.net/growth. And you can just put in your email address. I will not spam you with all sorts of other stuff. I will let you know when the book is available. And then as far as social media, LinkedIn is where I spend most of my time. So I'd love for your audience to come connect with me and say hello.
That's great. It's been a true pleasure to have you on today, Claire. Thank you so much.
Same here. I have loved the conversation. I have loved all of our rants about what is so wrong about culture and leadership and some of the easy ways that we can sort of right the ship. So I really appreciate the time.
All right. Well, you take care, and we'll see everyone next week on the People Strategy Forum. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. I'll connect
Thank
with
you.
you.
Yes,
Okay.
please do.